was it Mary Harrington says digital humility or digital privacy. It's like
Yeah.
it's just non-existent. It's just like no, everything's if we can sell it, we'll sell it. Take my
It's
soul.
all
We're at
content.
the crossroad and we're like, we're already like 5 letters in on our name, and I only have 6 letters in mine, so I'm fucked.
Yeah, I mean, well, like, just keep it casual, you know?
Just to ask a question because I watched your video on ethics and the internet and stuff, and um it added on a bit more to like the social dilemma and stuff like that. It was kind of it's along those lines.
Yeah.
But just the you kind of focused a little bit more on autonomy. Um, and I'm just curious, because you do the Dialogos workshops, you do them yourself, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering, do you think to set down to get rid of you had like what addiction, distraction, and manipulation,
Yeah.
because you can't just give up addiction. You have to like redirect
Yeah.
your no, but you have to redirect your like your effort or your identity towards something else. You have to
Yeah.
find something else that helps you transcend the finitude of human. Otherwise it'll just fail and you'll revert back to because even though it's a like cheap, poor substitute, it's still some bit of transcendence in a week. Dear, I'm going to get crucified for that one. But you know what I mean? There's a point to it.
No, well,
So
that was Jung's argument as well, is that like all addictions are kinds of like basically stolen spiritual enlightenment. Like AA is based on that premise of that it's filling a spiritual void for you. So you
exactly.
have to replace it with something equally potent.
Yeah. So I'm just curious
Yeah,
as
for
in,
sure.
like do you think do you like how do you because you're doing the whole ethics and the internet and that's where your research is and
Yeah.
all the rest.
Yeah.
For me it's always the virtues because it's just they're the eternal patterns
Mm.
and stuff like that. But do you see a way of drawing people away from or like
Mm.
how are you tackling the whole social media ethics thing? Is it like because you're going kind of top down through the job? But I think the people would rebel if Facebook got rid of its addictive qualities because Facebook couldn't give it the kind of fulfillment to replace
Yeah.
that gap. So I'm kind of curious, what way do you tackle that from a top-down like or your perspective, wherever that is?
Yeah, because that's one way of doing it, I suppose, would just be stripping out the addictive components, but then because they're all so competitive with each other as well, even if you stripped it out of Facebook, TikTok's still going to do that. And the one that's
Yeah.
more addictive is going to win. So there's a level of it's kind of like I think people have to be aware that it's addictive and that it's harmful because a lot of at the beginning it wasn't really people aren't really sure, you know what I mean? You're like, I'm maybe doing this more than I want to do it, and it
Yeah.
feels like kind of a problem, but like it's a bit like smoking where you're like, okay, people smoke and they think smoking's fine in the 1950s. It's like, yeah, it's great pastime. Then you're like, okay, no, this is actually, this is physically addictive and your body's going to crave this and it's probably going to get out of control for you. So it's the same thing with social media that they've used gambling technologies basically to create like a Skinner box type reward system where it's like you get social rewards for playing these games online basically. And it's a very pernicious kind of like video game logic, but also really linked into the real world. Because, I mean, video games can be addictive, but there's an extra layer of social media because it's people's actual lives. You know what I mean? And I do think now in 2024, after the pandemic, the social media landscape became almost more important than the physical one. People spent so long online during the pandemic that it's become the dominant reality almost. Like a lot of
So
our economic and political stuff, the public conversation, like people's news sources, like you see RTE going out of business, like a lot of legacy media outlets can't actually keep up now. Like there's been a real shift in something that was kind of a novelty at the start, but is now much more that like we haven't really noticed it, you know what I mean? It's happened gradually. But and so yeah, I think on some level there's one option which would be get rid of the whole thing, like turn it off. Just if there was an off switch, can you turn it off and stop it? I don't think we're ever going to do that. No more because it's too enmeshed in the economy, it's too enmeshed in politics, it's too enmeshed in people's lives. So the other option is then leave it with all these messed up incentives that are clearly causing mental health crises. They're causing issues with democracy. Um, there's all sorts of problems that are being recorded that are coming from it. And then the third option is to redesign it for better ends. So that's where I come in, and the virtues are very connected to that. Because if you're thinking about habits, so like at the moment, the platform's designed just to capture attention. It's kind of a brute, just engagement metric. It's like whatever keeps you looking at it the longest will be what it optimizes for, which doesn't really consider your well-being or your virtues or your character or any of this other stuff. So I think adding it needs to be, this is where I suppose regulation comes in, of redesigning on the design level to give people more options to design it themselves. So I think on one level, people will use it for distraction, use it for addiction, but by creating other options, you create competition to be like, okay, there's this bad social media that does all the gambling technology stuff. And then you start to create a better one that's like, okay, this actually helps you optimize your attention. It helps you, it gives you metadata on how long you're looking at this and what you're looking at. So you can then modify your behavior based on it. It's an interesting, it's an idea in AI that's emerging. It's a bit of a digression, but it might help you kind of flesh out what I'm saying here, which is, so one thing with AI is that it'll have all of your data. It'll know more about you than you can know about yourself. The same is true of social media algorithms, because they're recording all of your actions, all of your thoughts, how long you look at things. It can predict, hundreds of data points based on your activities online. And right now that's being used to manipulate people. So it builds a model of you to predict your actions to keep you engaging with the content. But that same data could be used to help you to understand yourself more, to see your patterns of behavior so that you can modify them into alignment with what you think they should be. So it would be like an extension of your metacognition. So we do that at the moment by writing things down or by talking to other people, and other people say, hey, you're actually doing this thing. And you're like, well, I didn't realize I was doing that. I thought I was, perfect. But now that I know that, I can change that behavioral pattern to something that's better. So it could be the same technology could be used for those ends. Like it builds a model of you, and that model is designed to try and help you to better yourself. At the moment, it's going the opposite way. So that for me is the positive vision of it, where it could actually help the meaning crisis, because addiction is a meaning crisis phenomenon as well. I mean, that is an important. I think social media came along to fill a void that existed predominantly in our generation and younger generations. Of what Mark Zuckerberg calls connection. Like that was his whole goal in creating, was to connect people. Like, why do people feel disconnected from each other? Because of the meaning crisis. Like, because we have no, we don't have these relationships, we don't have very clear social roles and social environments. That kind of uncertainty allowed these companies to take control of that. What in the literature they're called cultural commitment devices. Because this is actually, I mean, a lot of people do write about this in terms of that the collapse of religion um, allowed a vacuum for people to organize our attention experience for us with digital technology. And so I think that's
Yeah.
what they're doing. But they're doing it in a way that's very manipulative, and not aimed at people's, future well-being at all.
Can I take I want to call it a meta modern approach, but only because I'm essentially shoehorning that into every one of my fucking like theses now at this stage. But
Yeah.
that your whole cultural commitment, like the reason that that's so
Yep.
or so obviously linked to religion is because religion is the one and only thing that kind of
Mm.
has something bigger than you that you
Yeah.
do sacrifice into. But it can be like a team spirit, it can be like a company, it can be a country and all of the rest, but it just has to be
Yeah.
something bigger than you that you all
Yeah.
sacrifice into. And ideally, if you get that in like in a non-competitive or like eternal game, is it? The infinite game, sorry.
Mm.
Infinite game
Yep.
sort of dynamic, then it has to be something religious, kind of. I don't know. I just wanna because fuck me, everyone's kind
Yep.
of everyone's very jumpy when religion comes up, and I'm
Yeah.
trying desperately to just be like, I don't intend on it that way. I know the book, I get what you're on about, but at some
Yeah.
point we have to come around and just talk about, as you say, that cultural commitment. Which I'm going to steal that phrase. I like it. Um, so, but man, I have a load of questions here. Um,
Yeah. Shoot.
I've an absolute
Do it.
load. I'm going to throw out, I might throw out all of them and just see what kind of resonates.
Okay.
I will say the reason that we've all gone digital is because just like economically wise, the
Yep.
potential in the material realm isn't there because if you want to go on about like, intergenerational competition and all the rest, the younger generation does not have access to the material competition
Mm,
because that game isn't isn't it's not ready to be passed on to the next generation. And I don't think there's any intention on really passing it on to the next generation, which is why your kind of meme is going around that the boomers just will not retire and will not kind of like, get out of business. They are still running for president and bloody hell. Even
succeeding.
though we're in Ireland, I know, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And ironically, we have our youngest Taoiseach, so I shouldn't be saying anything at all.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said for what I'm trying to point towards there. But uh the second point is it's like, okay, so if we recognize that that just is the landscape, as in like without any sort of bitterness or animosity towards the fact that our generation is a more digital generation, just because of an economics, but also because we're native to it. Like this stuff came around when we were in school, and for the generations below us, it came out like they were literally raised on this stuff, so they're just native to it. So they're naturally more kind of digital anyway.
Yeah.
So like let's kind of play that out. So if we just accept that as part of the story going forward. Um, then you're on about, and this is where I want to get to, is you're on about then this ethical use of social media or ethical use of games or like all of these screen-based activities. It's just in general,
Yeah.
whether it's
Well, I
Netflix,
mean,
whether it's social media, whether it's games, I don't mind which, but all of this stuff
yeah.
for more
Yeah.
ethical interaction with all of that. And you're saying that AI might help empower us by reflecting back this kind of meta position and all of these things. It's like, okay, but if AI is going to try and empower us, it's going to try and empower us towards what? Either it's going to take the
Exactly.
North Star or we're going to take the North Star. And if we're going to say, hey, AI, you can show me my screen time, but I'm the one who gets to decide where this ship is going, which is the ideal response because let's admit, like AI could definitely use all of this metadata and just being like, a good person does these 10 things. And I know exactly the path and the road. It's going to take me
Yeah.
2 years to get you there, but I will manipulate the crap out of you and get you there.
But that's the danger. I mean, that's the question
Exactly.
is like it's Plato's noble lie. Like if you
Yes.
could top down manipulate people to be good, would you do it? And could you do it? Because whatever one person assumes is going to be good, like you see that happening like the Google Gemini thing with their AI, where they obviously programmed a very simplistic rule into it that the people that it generates have to be from multi-ethnic backgrounds, which resulted in, Black Hitler
Black
and
Nazis and
like,
stuff. Yeah.
Chinese Henry VIII. Because they did that exactly. Like they programmed top down their own morality into the machine. And you bring up a really good point, which is like, what is the point of the technology? And this is where the ethics, I think this is really like the question of ethics is like, what is this technology supposed to be doing for us? And I think in the most basic level, it's supposed to be enhancing our autonomy. It's supposed to be giving us more opportunities to fulfill our potential, to become the people that we could become. But there's a danger there that at the moment it's designed to take that away. It's designed to program us to be good consumers. And you make a very good point about the cultural commitment devices is that it's a very economic, the digital world is a very economic space. And there's a lot of ideology and stuff there as well. But like in a society with something higher than economics, you almost need something higher than it to reprogram it properly. Like you need an ethical value system say, no, this is actually more important than that. You can't just program people into these reward seeking behaviors and create addiction, basically. And in our current model of our current um, society, we can't actually do that. Like we don't have any, even scientifically, there's no account of free will or autonomy. Like, what are you going to use scientifically as a measuring stick for how a person is actually autonomous? Like, there's no, so we're in a bit of a bind there in a sense that we need um not a new religion, but something akin to a higher order value system in order to correct these things. And I think at the bottom level, that's like, okay, they're increasing narcissism, they're increasing self-destructive behaviors. We at least turn that down or make people aware of it. You know what I mean? It's like you can soften it a bit. It's not going to ultimately solve the meaning crisis or anything else, but um, I think it has the potential to be something that could be used for communication rather than for what it is used for, which is manipulation. Um,
Yep, I agree. And I've to be as explosive and kind of really pointed as I can be, I've talked to a few pagans, people who believe in kind of this more animistic sort of approach to reviving
mm,
spirituality. As in, like, if we do want to take care of the forest, okay, well, I'm going to personify the trees and the water and the grass and the insects and the whole thing in these different ways, and I'm going to talk to them in different ways and like really give it that much of attention. And that also
mm.
comes because again we are in Ireland, so that does come out of this kind of just strong no to a organized church because Ireland got a fairly bad deal on that one.
Yeah, I mean that's
Um,
for Ireland. That's the big thing, isn't it? Like that we
yeah,
hate like religion now, and I I think that that's a big because just because you throw out organized religion doesn't mean you have no religion. I mean, it depends how you
yeah,
define religion. I think because with attention, which is the key word there, it's like you're always prioritizing features of reality. Like we're running these attentional schemes a lot of the time that are just implicit. Like we don't understand why we're doing them. Um, but we still need them to make sense. The example I was talking about in a workshop the other day is like a coffee shop. Like a coffee shop doesn't exist in the walls of the coffee shop. I'm sure there's signs and stuff, but when I walk into a coffee shop, I know the routine of going up to the counter, paying for a drink. I wait in the queue. Everybody else does that as well. We're not like swinging on the chandeliers or throwing things at each other or like there's a routine that we follow that's an implicit narrative in that space. And the same is true for democracies and the same is true for classrooms or relationships. So just because we throw out the organized religion of the church doesn't mean we throw out the cultural schema that we're still like running through. But we just no longer have the ability to understand or modify it. So I think in that position, social media has taken advantage of that confusion and been like, well, we can just program people to do this shit. Like, we'll create like a really rewarding space where people can get rich and go viral and do all these things. And that's people are going to live there now. They've just built a new world, basically.
yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to kind of analogize those two different things. As in, like, everyone has their own kind of social media bubble, and this
Yeah.
pagan conversation is interesting because it re
Mm,
mystifies the world. It brings the mystery back into the world,
yes.
but then it also has this kind of like total autonomy where there's no kind of
Mm,
cultural commitments. And I've just
yep.
basically said to them, it's just like, okay, and what about everyone else? It's like, yeah, no, as long as we're good to each other, you can believe in whatever you want. I was like, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So what is this good to each other? Like, what's that? And then you
Yeah.
get into
It's the
this kind of like, okay,
utility
what's the
function.
good life or what's the, and then if you use that as an analogy then for this kind of internet space
Mm,
between these kind of different bubbles, it's like, okay, grand, you can have the polarized internet that you want if you really want to like, put the gloves on
mm,
and like, have a workout on your rhetoric or whatever else. You can do it, but just as long as everyone's then good to each other, and like that the system just doesn't collapse, basically, which is the fear. It
yeah.
hasn't
Which is
happened.
kind of, what I mean? It hasn't been.
No, but
Yeah.
it's only a fear. As in, like,
Yeah.
if in like 100 years' time we were able to look back and say, like, okay, politics got really polarized, and yeah, everyone got really good at rhetoric, but holy crap, the system held. We're just like, okay, now we have a total different relationship with the internet. It's just like, okay, that's where you go that's your gym, that's your workout, that's your
Yeah.
dojo, that's your Greek education of like, speech, writing, speaking, and physical education. Okay,
Yeah.
obviously physical wouldn't be online, but you know what I mean.
Mm,
But so all to say, sorry, I do want to bring this around to a point though, because we're on about this in general, we're on about this meta stance, these cultural commitments, we're on about this kind of some sort of North Star. And now for it not
mm,
to be some dogma or some sort of thing that like has to be done or anything like that, but um how does that work then? If we then marry it to the fact that we're not our economics are no longer material, they're mostly digital. And again, we've mentioned why that is, just generationally or just at the time we were born in. Again, not to be bitter
mm.
about that, but then just how do you have these cultural commitments in a digital space? And then you get into your network state kind of theory. And just is it possible? So this is where I want to throw it back to you, which is when you're on about like social media and you can have different incentives, different commitments and stuff like that. And if they aim in the right direction, you can have a competition in the right direction, basically where it actually does empower
Yeah.
you. But for that, you need to see someone else live a good life. And for it not to be some pyramid scheme where, like, you get some influencer who's like, follow me and I'll sell you a course, and then you can be an influencer and you can sell a course. For it not to be that, but for it to be a
Yeah.
genuine network state where we're all connected, we have some form of purpose, some form of momentum or something like that. And we do have something bigger than us that holds us together. And
Yeah.
that's not in a physical space, because in a physical space, it's easy to see, okay, this town looks beautiful. Oh my God, the streets are clean. Oh, like, what's everyone doing? Oh, they're all going to a certain church, or they're all doing a certain practice. Oh, okay,
Mm.
that's beautiful for me. How does your work with ethics and social media have the equivalent of seeing clean streets basically to attract you into a community, to attract you into a way of being without it being like a moral judgment that you have to do it or else you're going to hell?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't look at hell as a literal place in that sense, but it's
Yeah.
because I do think there's certain structures internally in us is the thing that, like, if you engage in like highly rewarding behavior all the time and there's a technology that's designed to reinforce those habits and feedback, you're gonna feel bad. Like you're gonna use up all of your positive emotions essentially by it's like if you just gamble all the time or you play video games for 8 hours a day, you're just going to feel terrible. Like it's not going to be, you're not going to live a very good life. And then you stack other dopamine on top of that to try and feel better. And it becomes kind of a vicious cycle. So, in some sense, the regulator is within us anyway. I mean, there's interesting one thing about social media that people might not know is that the actual environment. So in predictive processing, there's a big in neuroscience, it's like that we use models basically to map out our environment, like those stories. So, like, I have a model of a coffee shop of how to behave. So, when I go into the coffee shop, I can expect how I'm going to act. I'm going to expect to exchange money for coffee, and that'll be fine. And I'm not expecting somebody to, bounce my head off a wall the minute I get in. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't go there. So, I use a generative model in order to anticipate what's going to happen in the room. And so, we're always doing that. And even on social media, you're scrolling on a news feed or something like that, you might think, okay, this is just a bullshit website that promotes stuff that's going to, offend me or rile me up or that's funny and it's designed to do that. You're still taking all of that as evidence. Your system two primitive predictive processing system is still absorbing all of that information. And
Can I add in just that
yeah,
it's not strictly algorithmic in the fact, like, it is
mhm,
to a certain point. We're using a map and we're kind of constantly editing it, but there is, just to add, that there is like melody on top of this, as in, like, if you go
mhm,
into the coffee shop and you can make the barista smile because you break the pattern somehow and stuff like that. And
yeah.
same with like whatever comments you have online and all the rest. So we're like, I'm just so that we're not offering some like really dead kind of landscape of what the world looks like or what a good life is.
Yeah, I mean,
Just that
this is a
this
simplified,
is just
but
how the
this
brain
type of
works.
modeling, I mean, the point for the social media is that you're we're taking it as evidence. So, like, the placebo effect is a good example of that. Like, people, they'll do studies on people where they'll go into a hospital with a person who's dressed as a doctor who will tell them, "I'm not a doctor. This is a fake pill," and they'll take the pill, and the pill still works because your system two is going. They're dressed like a doctor. This is a hospital. He's giving me a pill. Pills work, and it still works. So on social media, we're always building this model of reality, even if we're not aware of it. And the problem is that the information on social media is dynamically optimized to put you into a state where you're essentially in very emotional. Like that's how it tricks you into using it. And so if you're spending a lot of time in that environment, it's like a bad evidence generator. You're getting bad evidence for what the world is like. All these things, the world is full of really attractive, topless people who are on Lamborghinis and yachts, having the best lives ever. And I'm sitting here eating toast and it's terrible. So even if you're consciously aware of it, it's still having this negative effect on us. And so by people using these things, their lives are they're going to cause a lot of pain. I think a lot of people are in pain now, but don't necessarily connect the two together to be like, oh, this could actually be the cause of a lot of those problems. And so I think we're in like draft one of the internet of well, draft two technically because it's web 2.0, and draft two is social media really. The hopes is that in editing it, like having some centralized regulation, considering people's well-being, some of these rules, like, okay, you can't manipulate people's emotions in order to make them feel bad about themselves. Um, then people will be able to use it without so many downsides. You know what I mean? And so it's part of an iterative process of fitting it more. It will never replace, it won't, you know, you can't just live on the internet. We're embodied beings. Like it's not going to meet all of our needs. Um, but I think that some of the corrosive stuff could be taken out of it actually relatively easily. Like,
Can I put a spanner in the works then? If
for sure.
'Cause
Do
I
it.
agree that you could probably take out some of this rage baiting and stuff out of it.
Yeah.
But there is a certain under like the reason that we're kind of numbing ourselves as well is because there is the meaning crisis. There is this lack
Yeah.
of this. So if I can try to give like a quick the meaning crisis is some lack of potential and energy, like this access to potential and energy, some bit. It's also a lack of direction for it. It's a lack of kind of where the structure is going or what we're all building towards. There's a certain amount of that. But some part of it, as in like in the like what 1920s and stuff like that, you had a boom of kind of creativity. And you've had booms through the 20th century of just but it was prefaced on this excess of potential, this excess of complexity. And then complexity went in like 10 different ways. And then you found jazz, or you found like the just absolute streak of movies that happened in like what the 70s, whatever. And so with that as a premise, is that we need a certain amount of excess complexity that we are currently in a time that is facing some sort of threshold where there will be a significant decrease in resources and potentially complexity, especially materially. So the
Wait, a
question,
decrease in complexity or a increase in
yes,
complexity? Do
materially
you think it'll get
decrease.
less complex?
I simply mean as in like we won't have access to as many different types of food. We won't have access to as
But is
many.
that not more complicated? Like if you can't just go out and buy something,
Yes,
like
but I
you have to
mean,
like make things, you have to produce it. Like it becomes like as society degenerates, it actually becomes more complex because we have
it
more
becomes harder.
problems. I
It
think
becomes
that
harder. I
complexity, I think,
don't.
is the manifestation of uncertainty.
Okay, I think I think I understand you. I just I need some words then for good complexity that holds, as in the fact that when you build a system, then you get, oh, now we're able to get these fruits from like Egypt, and now we're able to get this stuff because the global net trade network has allowed us to have this
Yeah.
massively complicated and complex
To
sort
do
of
stuff that
system.
we couldn't do
Exactly.
individually.
Okay, so as that comes down and as that
Yeah.
starts to grind and stuff like that, we're going to lose access to that structure of complexity, and our
Yeah.
lives will become more difficult. And what we have access to, the options that we have access to, will become simpler, or they'll become more, they'll become smaller, narrower. Just the options that we will have.
I think,
That
yeah, no, so if I understand, sorry, I'll just so yeah, if we lose access to the kind of economic global supply and demand structure, we then have to meet our own motivational and emotional needs with people nearby, which will change our motivations and needs. You know what I mean? If I can't, suddenly food will be a lot more important on my hierarchy of goods, and so will water. If there's no plumbing and there's no like, the things that before we take for granted become suddenly our whole reality. But I just think that would be actually maybe less, I don't know, cognitively complex in a sense of um like doing heavy, I don't know, yeah, like technical thinking. But because I suppose that type of heavy technical thinking is predicated on being able to get food and get water and all these things being taken care of for you. But I don't know if that world would be less stressful or less complicated in its own
no,
ways, I suppose.
definitely not less stressful. Definitely not
Yeah.
less stressful.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's going to be more cognitively complex because we're going to have to juggle our
Mhm,
basic needs in a way that we didn't have to before, our social needs in a way that we didn't have to before. Like all of the cognitive stuff is going to
mhm,
become more alive and dynamic. But the material stuff, as in like if the lights go out, we're losing that system. That's a complex system that we're losing, or it's a
yep,
complicated system we're losing. And same with plumbing, as you say, or any of these things. Like that's
mhm.
um I don't want to get stuck on just the use of the word. I hope like just the understandings kind of got there of what I'm trying to refer to. Because
Yeah,
what I'm
well,
basically saying
the reason I
is,
was jumping on it, sorry, was because so complexity, how we handle complexity, I think, is wisdom. So, like with an
yeah,
increase in complexity, we need an increase in wisdom. And right now, we have a massive increase in complexity without a massive increase in wisdom. So, people are just more stressed because things are more complicated, they're more out of control. There's more meta problems that nobody can solve, like AI, like, climate change, like World War III. All of these things seem to be are really complicated, but they're not, we don't have a good way of conceptualizing or dealing with them. So I do think the wisdom and what is wisdom, I think of it as metacognition in large part, like ethically oriented metacognition. So to have something that can increase our metacognition for us technologically would help us to deal with complexity. Whereas right now it's overloading us with complexity and making us feel more stressed. Um, but that's a separate argument. But that's why I was jumping on that, because of the connection between wisdom and complexity. Um, is
yeah,
important.
you're 100% there because that's where I want to go with it is just saying that as because you're after
Mhm.
using the word autonomy there for
Yep.
what the way you want to reshift
Mhm.
technology or like the social media and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I tend to use the word sovereignty instead because
Mhm.
I think we can give up I can give up my capacities to my partner, say, or to my family. And technically, I have less autonomy then. I don't have as many choices, but I still feel
Mhm.
like a sovereign individual because I've chosen to be part of this system or something like that. Um, again, that's tech or take it or leave it for whatever that is. But the point is, the point is like we like I'd love to come back to that at some point. But the point I want to
Well,
try
I
into
could
today,
give you, because the meaning of autonomy is a very like overloaded word. Like it means a lot of stuff, and a lot of it in the Enlightenment is very like top down, just like I have choice over everything kind of
yes,
autonomy. Biological autonomy is quite different. It's an idea of maintaining stability through change, like organizing your behavior across time. So it's more like homeostasis, allostasis. Like it's the ability to meet your needs and continue to grow in the face of entropy and uncertainty. So it's
okay.
I maybe should have articulated that better, but it's a technical term from cognitive science.
100%. No, 100%. I love people meeting people in this corner of the internet because like there's such depth. And
Yeah,
then it's
some
just
words
trying to
like that as
like
well are
cross
not
over and
good.
translate. I love it. Um, but all to say that so on because I think that um maturity or wisdom is
Mm,
de-identifying okay, I'm going to use the word autonomy, so I'm going to try and stick with that. Um
yeah.
de-identifying one's autonomy with the like every potential thought that we have and saying like because like basically as a teenager I come in and I'm like I could be this, I could be that, like look how strong I am,
Mm,
look how I'm good at this thing, I'm good, and it's just like all of this thing, and yes they're all me, and it's just like no, the world gets to say, and you get to like shave down the corners, and you're
mhm,
okay, I'm losing autonomy, I'm becoming responsible for things, I'm picking up duties, and yet I'm finding this kind of core autonomy, the thing that holds me together. Like that's kind of what wisdom is. Um,
mm,
some bit, or that's kind of what it feels like, at least a little bit, because as I'm getting older, there's definitely more pulls and restraints on my time, and yet I still
yeah.
feel vital and still feel autonomous in my push forward. Even though, like, I can't, well, I could
Mm,
go pick like a totally new profession, but I won't because I like the one I'm in. I'm committed to it. Some bit.
yeah.
But all
But
to
that's
say,
also like as you reduce like potential, you get actuality. Like, and there's a level of that autonomy that's like skill. It's like to play a guitar, you can't be, kicking a football and boxing and running around. It's like you sacrifice all of that just to learn the guitar. And at the start, that really reduces your autonomy, but then you learn to play the guitar very well, and then you gain a kind of freedom with the guitar that you don't have otherwise. And I think it's the same with your own life, that the more stuff you sacrifice, the more actuality you get by cutting down potential. You get real skill in something. So I
Yeah,
totally agree that
you
that's
get depth and you get
maturity.
mastery, like
Yes, and that's
or
freedom.
whatever.
Like, yeah, for sure.
100%. Okay, actually that's pretty important. Because the I want to try and then like get all of this in together where I say that if we're not in the material economy anymore and we're more in the digital economy, if we're having to try to choose what the good life is or what like have some sort of meta perspective to it,
Yes.
some sort of
Mm,
cultural commitment that holds everything together, then and with the meta crisis going on such that the world's opportunities again on the material level are going to become more narrow and more restricted, then
mhm.
how do we find some path for whether social media fulfills this, but really just on like an individual and kind of spiritual sense. How do
Yeah.
we push forward, get older, become more mature, more wise in a shrinking economy where we still feel autonomous and we don't have to try and fight to feel autonomous? Because that's the like obviously that's the worry. But so I think that in when the economy is shrinking, so material expansion and material growth has to be off the table. Now, as in how not to throw the baby out with bathwater. I do not want to be eating bugs. I do not want the government to give me some
You
food
might
pills
enjoy
that
it.
keeps
You
me.
never know.
No, get out of that.
Yeah.
Get out of that. I like as in
That's the yeah, that's the World Economic Forum argument, is it? Like, you might like bugs.
Okay, so
Um,
if we try and
yeah.
not, if we try and just caveat that, say like, we don't want material growth, but we do not want some total restriction on physical enjoyment or something like that, or physical um beauty, put it that way. Um, but we want this, we still like our brains crave expansion to a degree that we're not able to satisfy. Hence why we have
Mm,
addiction, hence why we like have a meaning crisis, is because
yeah.
we crave some bigger expansion. So can social media or can AI or can we as a collective put something non-material, so I'm very
Mhm.
like obviously on about spiritual here,
Yeah.
that doesn't fall into the religious, but that gives us the expansion and can like how do you think the social media landscape kind of an
Yeah,
ethic
I well,
lines up to that?
I don't think social media can necessarily do that, but I agree. So my thinking on that would be that so like as we've become materially more successful, our well-being hasn't gotten more successful. There's a disconnection between material expansion and human well-being. You can read, there's plenty of studies on like when people for a certain when you get out of like dead poverty, like day to day, although a lot of those people are pretty happy as well. I mean, some of the happiest places in the world are play, which is very paradoxical if you think that like material wealth is what makes us happy. This stats don't really match up with that a lot of the time. I mean, it takes away a certain amount of problems, but once you have a certain amount of wealth, more wealth doesn't increase your well-being. So even if we're having like a contraction of our well-being, you rightly point out that there are other non-zero sum games that we can play. So a non-zero sum game like wisdom development, if I become wiser and you become wiser and somebody else becomes wiser, it doesn't everybody wins. There's no limit to that. You're increasing in wisdom helps me become wiser. Whereas in a zero sum game, if there's, a finite supply of money in the economy, one person gets all the money, everybody else doesn't get it. So I think for people to be happy and to live a good life involves participating in non-zero sum games. Like if you base all of your self-worth on your participation in a zero sum game, you're going to have to become kind of a tyrant, really. I mean, you're gonna have to win that game and be the best at it and stay the best. But you see it in the UFC and stuff like that. Like guys become the best, they get to the very top, and then somebody else comes along, they beat you, and then you're stuck in it. There's a in those zero sum games, there's one position, whereas in non-finite games, there's more. And so I think because a lot of them are spiritual as well, like virtue development, character development, education is a good example of that as well. I mean, me becoming more educated doesn't make somebody else less educated. Um, so I think prioritizing those zero sum games are good for our well being because our well being is really based on error correction. It's based on feeling like we're getting more of a mastery over our environment and our world. That's what positive emotion tracks, like the reduction of uncertainty, the reduction of complexity or entropy. Like we're actually set up for that. So um I think the big problem right now for people is that things have become so complicated so quickly that we're just overwhelmed. Like we can't actually deal with it. And that's, I don't know if you're familiar with the meaning in life literature, but that's one of the main components of meaning in life is being able to make sense of your life. Like if your life doesn't make sense, it's unbelievably complicated. You don't understand it. Who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? It's going to be very hard to find meaning in life if that's the case.
Okay, and I like that. And I've come across people who are able to make sense of life better than I can, or they open doors in social situations that I can't. Like they just do a
Yeah.
jujitsu move and they just opened up like an emotional door there where, wow, we
Mm,
ended up talking about something that I just wouldn't have got to on my own. And they're beautiful moments and I chase them and I love them. And my question is then, as we're getting more digital, we're clearly doing this online. Um,
yeah.
and like maybe rhetoric becomes more important and body language becomes less important. Maybe like who knows how that develops. Um, but it's so much easier to see um pre-internet. When I'm walking around town, I get to see who's wise. Because even when like if the whole town is going through some sort of famine or difficulty or something like that,
Mm,
I can see who's walking around with a smile. I can see who's playing with the kids. I can see who, for
mm,
like, even though materially they are suffering just as bad as anyone else, I can see who's spiritually transcending and is
yeah.
an admirable character. I only ever get a persona online.
Yeah.
It doesn't like the I don't get to see what happens when the cameras go off. I don't know if your room is a total
Fair.
mess outside of that little 4x4 that I can see at the moment. I can tell you for a
Yeah,
fact
my
mine
girlfriend's
is,
stuff is
just so you know.
this is her changing room, so it's there's quite a pile back there. It's not mine though, I swear. It
Um,
wasn't me.
but 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 this is like that's kind of what I mean, as in like there's
Yeah.
like this is like the internet just by its nature is staged. So trying to
Yeah.
have this virtuous or wisdom or kind of
Mm,
complexity, like understanding of complexity, um
yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
impossible when we're all just showing each other a complicated mask of whatever type. So how, like, is it possible for AI to show when wisdom, like when when the understanding of complexity is more developed in a person? Like,
Mm.
or is that like going to be way too intrusive and like that's because even saying it
It's
there, I get
already pretty
heebie-jeebies.
intrusive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't, they can already track, Facebook knows if your parents are divorced based on 5 minutes of you using it. Like, so it's pretty,
Really? I have
yeah,
not heard
yeah. They
that
can
one.
track her like what sexuality you are or what, like, how you're gonna feel about guns and
Oh,
they can
that's
track
weird.
a full psychographic profile really in a very limited amount of time. But yeah, no, I totally, again, I don't think the internet is because it's a contrived, like it's a tool, like it should be a tool, and a tool isn't the point of life, I don't think. I mean, we're kind of, a lot of what's coming up, I think, is like, what's the highest game, that we can play, really? And that for me is yeah, wisdom and the acquisition of, good
Yeah.
character is the highest at that point. But then I guess there's questions about, because, like, I don't know if you watched Jonathan Pajot's talk recently. He did one for Ralston College. It was a good one where he talked about teleology pretty much. How we know a knife is a good knife because it cuts things, and the point of a knife is to cut things. We know a clock is a good clock when it tells the time because the point of a clock is to tell the time. But what's a good person is a different question, because what's the function of a person? And a lot of people have kind of come to, every ethical judgment we make about people implies that teleology, like you're comparing it to a implicit standard. And so in Christianity, a good person is Jesus Christ. Like he's the model, the ideal person. So, and that's why that ideal becomes a judge, because automatically you're comparing, when you put the person at the top, you compare yourself to them by extension, and that's the entire mechanism of a religion, really. And since we threw out Christianity, we're in a position of trying to figure out, what is the meter stick for being a good person, and living a good life is either becoming, being, being in alignment with being a good person. Like it is an ethical thing, not in just like a very boring right and wrong sense, but as in like you want to be, if you're living a good life, you're not living an evil life or a bad life, you're in alignment in some sense with that highest purpose. And so I think the secular world has a real problem there in specifying who that should be. Um, and that's just going to be a problem, even if you're a pagan and you could say like, pagan philosophers would say Socrates is that guy. Like Socrates is he's the guy that we should all aspire to be. And that uh and that might work in a sense, or the Buddha or somebody else, but you're in a position
Nah,
as a
screw
person
that.
that
I'm
we
going for
have to
Thor
pick
and
one.
Odin and Zeus. I'm going like all out, like fucking lightning bolts
Yeah.
and everything, like
I
war
mean,
and
you could pick worse, like you know what I mean? It could be, there's a couple of dodgy ones in the 20th century that could be
um,
want to avoid them, like but
Lord. Is it possible for them not to come up, huh? But
yeah.
and I mean that genuinely, it actually is because they are just such a kind of
Yeah.
bulwark against it. Like just we all recognize that one, yeah. Good.
The
Um,
nature of human
but
evil. But then again, in the evil,
yeah.
it tells us something about the good. Like if you know what a really, really bad person is, maybe the opposite of that is, we're easier at saying who's a bad person than who's a good person. Like
Okay,
it's definitely, it
but
makes more
saying that, as
sense.
in like if you
Mm.
wanted to say why, we'll use Hitler as the famous
Yeah.
example, why he's
Yeah.
such a bad person. Like you've done the
Yeah.
Dialogos practice, so you know exactly what it is to circle around something and for you to be able to point
And
right
not
at
know
it.
it.
But any words, any more words I put to it will only
Mm.
catch an aspect. He was really orderly. Okay, well that can go in the good direction as well. He was really efficient. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
very enthusiastic. Like there's a lot
Certainly
of
was
things here. Like, do you know what I
enthusiastic. All
mean? And I was
right.
like, God
Yeah.
damn it! Like, but you can point at it. Like you know it when you see
Yeah.
it. So how that yeah, what the good life is it's difficult for exactly that reason because you can only really point at it and you can't really describe it. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But okay, so you mentioned earlier though that um the internet is a tool and that it won't
Yeah.
give us the answer that we're looking for here. It won't give us that kind of whatever the transcendent step is, whatever the good life is.
No way, man.
It
Because a
won't
lot of the
make
AI
that.
people are, that's their art. Your man Yosha Bach, I saw him interviewed on it, that he was like, somebody was just like, well, what's the utility function? Like, why are you building this godlike artificial intelligence? And he's like, it'll tell us what it's for. We're going to make it so smart that it'll tell us what its function is. I was like, how can you trust that? Like, you're making a tool that you don't know what its point is. And I think a lot of these problems have come from
Oh,
us inventing incredibly powerful things for no reason. Like, we don't have a reason for doing it. We just want to make the most powerful thing possible. And
but
that story doesn't
there's been plays
necessarily
and
like,
stories about that, as in like
that's the
like,
oldest, like
that
it's
humans were
hubris. Like,
exactly that creation. As in like,
yeah.
why did God create us? It's just like, I don't know, you figure it
Yeah.
out what you're about. It's like, but
But there
surely there
you
was
go.
a purpose to it.
That's it. God in that story created us. And so we want to create life. Like we want to be God. And
Yep.
there's an aspect of that of putting ourselves in the highest position, which is if you accept that Jesus' argument is like you're then the measure of everything. Man is the measure of all things. And how are we so sure about our own quality that we can be that person? You know what I mean? I don't think I can. So, I'm very skeptical of anybody that does, put themselves in that position. And I think Hitler
Oh
was a guy
God,
that did
yeah.
that for sure.
Yeah, if you want a marker, if you want a clear marker that you can like linguistically put in a sentence, as in like, thinking you are the measuring stick is really
Yeah.
high on the list. Um, but I want to,
Terrifying.
sorry, I want to bring it back to a point there of just saying that the internet's a tool and that it won't give us the answers. Um,
No.
Meaning that it won't show us what a good life is. It won't give us the connection that we're searching for. It won't give us the growth and expansion and the access to potential that we're looking for because it's only
Mm,
a tool that we can use for something else. Um, okay,
yeah.
if we return then back to where, like early in the conversation when we were saying that um, the material economy isn't made for us at the moment. It's not, it hasn't been delivered to us, as in like how the legacy that the older generation will pass on a material front has yet to be decided, and I'm not trying to blame them for that because
Mm,
they are the first generation that will be trying to give a legacy in a like post-expansionist world. As in like the economics just change altogether. So like how the importance of lineage and like genetics or like family or whatever starts becoming strange again because like we thought we were past it and it's like, oh, that's going to come back
It's
to
very
haunt us.
important, yeah, and
Um,
inheritance and houses and
in
that
like a
kind of
weird
stuff.
way. And then so if we're doing that in a post expansionist world, that's a
Mhm.
totally new question. So I'm really not trying to like I'm 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 slowly getting tired of the kind of bitterness towards the kind of boomers and stuff like that, where I'm just kind of like, do you know what? They gave us ultimate freedom. They gave us and said like, hey, find a
Mhm.
job that you love and you can do whatever you want. Like there was like that we had all of the social revolutions that we had during the like 70s or whatever else. So like I get it.
Yeah.
So not to take anything from it, but if you're saying that the digital will not be the space where we find ourselves and it's not the
Mhm.
space where it might not be the space where we find this love and pursuit of wisdom, even though I do argue that that's what I'm doing at the moment in the
I
Dialogos.
think, yeah, well, I think we can do it, but I would just say that that's just an enhancement of something that we could be doing ourselves. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
it provides avenues for learning things, for talking to new people, in ways that we couldn't do before. But that's an intention, that you bring to it. And so it's kind of like an amplifier, really. Whatever intention you bring to it, you're going to get more of. So if you go to it just to be distracted or to be angered or whatever, you're gonna get if you go there to be wise, you'll probably make some gains. Like there's a lot of interesting people and interesting stuff. Um, and so yeah, the problem is it's just amplifying everything. But I don't think
Oh,
it's the solution to, I for me with the social media stuff, it's a very specific set of like bad incentives that have been that they're getting away with something really that won't, in the next 10 years, I don't think it'll be there. Like there's plenty of research at this stage to be like, look, this is not, good for people, particularly for younger people. I mean, the mental health crisis in teenagers, particularly teenage girls, is like one in two teenage girls have anxiety or depression, like, and the rates of like self harm and suicide doubled since 2010. You're like, clearly something's going on, and that's not good stuff. But I appreciate that there's a bigger game at play in the meaning crisis and everything we're at now that the internet does fit into, I think, but isn't going to solve ultimately.
um, I I feel like a really bad scientist because I'm essentially like I have the answer and I'm just trying to find the experiment and the way of phrasing all of these problems so that everyone comes along and does the Dialogos practice. Like that's literally
Yeah.
it's the worst type of salesman. It's like no, it's the worst type of scientist where it's just like, okay, I'm going to have the answer first and then I'm just going to
Mm,
funnel the evidence and just be like, but every like I'm trying to because it's kind of like that thing of like, what's a good person or what's a bad person. I can point towards it.
yeah.
It has done this thing, so I've become like slightly evangelical about it and stuff like that. But it's just it I don't see an alternative for fulfilling this primal need that our brains have for stimulation and for expansion into complexity. Because
Mm,
that's what like our brains are just built that way. There's a reason why it's so hard to meditate, and unless everyone meditates and like just finds inner peace, then it's going to be
yeah.
some form of expansion into complexity. And the only way that happens in a world where material expansion is no longer possible or is heavily restricted, the only way I see that is wisdom, is some form of like it can go to like dogmatic spirituality where like it just how well can you recite your poem from third class in school or something like that. And, like just
Yeah.
learn the lines, don't think, just
And
repeat
don't
the
actually
lines.
grow as a person or
Exactly. So
develop
like
and like,
there is
yeah.
that potential as well, and dear Lord, that's scary as hell. So this is why like I just until I can if I can find something else that fulfills this expansion into complexity, I'm all for it. And if there's multiple options, dear Lord, that's a beautiful world. Um, but I feel like there are multiple options, but they all source from this wisdom pursuit. And then that can become like a wise speaker, a wise elder, a wise community person, a wise hero or storyteller or like whatever it is, and you can get into, then there's multiple games to be played, and you can complexify and you can compete and you can have these like zero-sum games within the arena that it's meant to be in, where we do
Yeah.
like politically go at each other, or we do like storytell and kind of like, AI art our way through some sort of big World Cup FIFA event or something like that. Like there's loads of potential. Um,
Yeah.
but it's the only it's the only source, like kind of route that I can really find that navigates not only the crisis that we're in, as in when it comes to attention and AI and social media, but also the coming crisis of the economics just really starting to crunch,
Mm.
and like how those things come together. As well as like, just the population collapse and everything else that's in the bloody in the meta crisis, whether it's food or dead zones in the water or oil or fertilizer or like, pick your poison. You,
Yeah.
there's a list.
There's a big
So
list.
um so like
But
within that world,
mm, yeah.
I'm just like, I only see the virtues. So I do feel like a bad scientist, and I'm not going to try and pretend as if that's a good quality. But
But no, I think you're right, like, because that fundamentally what that grounds out in is having an ethical worldview that we can engage in ethical improvement, because ethical improvement doesn't cost anything. Like, you don't have to be rich to do it. You can do it with nothing. Like, I mean, it's kind of, you know, a lot of them recommended not having too much stuff because you get attached to it, and that's not actually very good for your growth and development into wisdom. So I think that's what it grounds out in ultimately. Like, and the reason the Dialogos practice is powerful is because it's got that ethical structure and those virtues that are, and if you pull the virtues together, you get a type of person. And like that type of person is like, that's why they say Christ is the wisdom and virtue of God, because he embodied all of those virtues. And so that's why he's the measuring stick, essentially, is because, like, oh yeah, so we can learn wisdom, we can learn virtue, but then you look at people that embodied them in their lives, and then we tell stories about them in order to abstract them. And that's the foundation of our culture. It's the foundation of how we act. It's the foundation of our relationships with each other and the functioning of democracy and all of the other stuff. Like, economics is just a means of meeting basic needs. Like, it has to be rooted in all this other stuff. Like, same with science as well. I mean, science is a method. It has to be rooted in morality and civilization as well. Otherwise, you create, atom bombs and these kind of very, like, the Chinese structure of social credits and watching everybody and using technology to create a totalitarian state. And I do think in the West we're really poised between those at the moment. Like, we're building something here um that's not in line with our core values of the West.
can I ask you a
And
question? I
that,
know you have to go in a
yeah,
minute, but I want to ask you just one question before you go.
yep,
Do you think, so you're on about that, we need to kind of some bit personify what a wise person looks like,
yeah.
to some extent, and at the ultimate level, like that would be kind of ideal, or that would be a good thing to have. It would help us all orientate towards it somehow. Like it
I
would
just
have
think
a
there's no other
gravity.
way of doing it as well. Like, it's
Yeah.
every time you make that a judgment about people, you're implying a
Yeah.
standard.
You need a
So
ruler,
it's
basically.
it's unavoidable. Like, it's
Yeah.
built in.
Okay, so
But
my
yeah,
question then is, can we believe in a ruler that did not historically or physically exist, but that literally or
mm,
pragmatically might be the ruler exactly? It might have a
mm,
reality that wasn't historical or wasn't physical, and I'm not trying to say it wasn't. I'm just trying to say, can we open the door? Like, do you think
yeah.
society can open that door and actually survive it?
If not a historical person, I think the disadvantage with that is it's very abstract.
Yep.
So there's a question of, can we live up to that ideal? Like, because you could envision like Superman, and we can't do that. Like, it doesn't. I think it helps if it's a real person.
Well,
For me, it's
that's the whole
it's
argument for
Christ or it's
Christianity
Socrates.
over.
Um, and they're echoed in every other person. Like, I think in Ireland we have great examples of that as well. Like, we tend to think that some of the highest stuff is like martyrdom, like sacrificing your life for the good of others. And like the foundation of the Irish state is built on the same idea of the Easter Rising and those the people that fought in that and sacrificed their lives for the freedom of Irish people, political and economic. But and then Socrates died for freedom of truth. I mean, um, in some sense, they provide a model for how how to live a good life, but also what's really significant. You know what I mean? Like, what did Hitler die for? You know, he fucked up trying to take over the world. Like, it didn't
No, no,
really,
no, 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 no.
you
Let's
know.
let's be honest. Let's be honest. He was married for one day. That was it.
Yeah, yeah. And he was like,
Um,
"Oh, fuck this." Um, so I think it
but
could be. I think like Harry Potter for me is one that I come back to because I think Harry Potter is a great example of like a hero mythology and like that hero structure is person independent in a sense. It's like we've used enough examples to abstract the pattern, but it becomes too abstract
yeah.
without it being particular. It's like Harry Potter's rooted in England. You know, he's a schoolboy. He is in a specific culture there of wizards and muggles, and it that all those details make it more applicable.
But
Because we
okay,
have to
so
act it out.
can we? So John says that we can't live on the Silk Road. So maybe Harry
Yeah.
Potter is going to be your religion, your philosophy, and all of
Yeah,
the rest.
definitely was when I was
But
a kid anyway,
hey,
but
I
hopefully
I
not when you're
remember when that last book came
young.
out. I was in a Gale Talk, and my nose did not leave those pages until I finished that book.
Man,
Like
it was serious.
that was such a cultural thing. But
Yeah.
but no, I'm wondering because I think we're going to maybe tilt back towards a really hard uh relook at what the ruler is.
Yeah.
As you said, I don't really think there's a way around that. And my question is, will that happen in a kind of like, no, my ruler is the right ruler, and how dare you? Because my ruler is real, your ruler is imaginary. Or
Yeah.
are we going to come around to a place where it's like, okay, all the rulers are some bit imaginary, they're some bit real, and we can argue about the kind of ratio of what that
Mm,
is, but are they all aiming towards some meta good that is too abstract, but is perfect once you're at that level. Once you're at that
yeah.
level, you're kind of like you're into abstraction, you're into like the leap of faith, you're into the kind of like, look, this is where my existential bet is. And then below that in your everyday life, you have this personal relationship with the more real, with the more tangible, the more personable, whatever character or whatever person, or so I don't mean to be derogatory here at all. I just mean, do you think that that door can open and we can actually look at each other and maybe even value each other? Um, I'm just curious. I know you have to go, but I'm it's like is it a yes or no
I'd
on
still
that
have
one? Do you
another
think?
10 minutes or so. So
Oh yeah, okay. But
yeah,
do you think
yeah,
that's like a hard no, or do you think that's like a possible?
yeah. I don't know. I mean, because in pluralistic societies, you know, you're going to need to be able to have multiple religious structures. And the secular thing is like very different in that that's kind of even atheism, because I was born as an atheist, like, and kind of tried to desperately make that true, but I just realized I'd misinterpreted what gods were, like that they're it just a personification of values fundamentally, and that values are pre-facts as well. Like we're really that's how we function. Like we value one thing over another, and there's no way out of that. So the question is like, what are the higher level values and what are the lower ones? Like what is the absolute value and how does that structure the other ones? And so in some sense, I was just dragged unwillingly to monotheism because it's just like you're like, okay, well, so there's many values, but they're all fighting each other, which is the war of the gods and polytheism, which happens inevitably. But it's like, okay, when they fight each other, then they come to this deeper level that there's some sort of unity behind the multiplicity. And so for me, we're always pushing towards um, that realization. And Plato was a monotheist as well. I mean, he had his good that is the one, and you can't fully grasp it. It's the source of intelligibility. Um, and yeah, I think that has to be the foundation rather than the lower kind of level gods, which will necessarily result in chaos because they're incommensurable values, I think. You know what I mean? Like certain stuff, even in like the Greek pantheon, I'm thinking about like Zeus is like power, Athena's wisdom, Ares, rage, and they can't get along, they're fighting, they're very involved in human lives. And so to have unity, I think involves unity of principle. Like we have to think, you know, if Jesus Christ is the meter stick, then we all agree that he's, you know, the the standard by which we are to be judged. Because if you have multiple standards by which to be judged, it kind of just breaks apart. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I don't think you can do it with, they're like different realities. Like you're living in different,
I think
um, completely different standards. I don't know.
I think this is why I like the Neoplatonist approach because it has the one, like if we're on about like the Dialogos practice, it has the one and then it has the like rainbow refraction basically of all the different virtues that come out. So there's a recognition that there is a unity, but there's a
Mm,
recognition that as humans we can only really perceive one at a time, like at its depth. And even then
yeah,
we run up to the aporia and we run up to the place where it's like I can't go any further because I'm just human and like my words,
yeah,
it's right there, but I can't put any more words to it because I'd only catch like a slice of it. Um,
yeah.
so there is this need for paganism. There is this need for to really valorize and really kind of like sanctify. I'm using big words there, but like
Mm,
water or the forest or the kind of nature or something like that. There's a need, maybe if we are to kind of
mm.
be kind to nature again, maybe we need to personify it for a few
But do you
generations.
believe in idolatry in a sense of that if we put the wrong thing in the highest place, bad stuff is going to happen? Like if you worship a golden
100%.
calf, like, because that's what addiction is. Addiction is idolatry. Addiction is you're using something to plug that existential hole, be it drugs, be it, alcohol, be it social media, which is fame and popularity. There's a lot of things we can put in that place. But the point is that the ultimate, the good, is the thing that has a, a rightful place in that spot. And if we put anything else in it, we're fucked. Like that's the premise.
But okay, so the argument is that at the moment we have no elevation, so the land is just flat. And that what we need to do at some point is to say,
Mm,
okay, we got nature, we do have rage, we have power systems, we have wisdom, we have beauty. Beauty needs to be recaptured. We have truth and science, and we have all of these things, and that we need to personify them again to try to just connect with them again because at the moment trying to connect to nature is impossible because no one can name the plants, no one can name how any of it works. So we just need it's a forest. It's like, yeah, okay, but we're destroying
mm,
that forest while we're looking at this forest. Okay, so we need to have some personification of like nature itself. Okay,
mhm.
the birds travel from that forest over to this forest. Actually, that's really important. Okay, and and 100% there is a fear that that becomes the god. Um,
Yeah, I think
but
you see that
it's
in some of the extreme environmentalism at the moment is a
oh yeah,
real
yeah.
preference of like a mother goddess type thing. And the problem is then if you put that first, you can do, is that really gonna be good for people? You know what I mean? If you have a very
Okay,
pro environment friend, because it's a trade-off. Like,
but
so
this is
I
this is my
think,
question then. Like, can we
yeah, yeah.
open the door to that we're going to that all rulers are a certain amount true and a certain amount fake? Like, is it possible? Do we have
Mm,
to fully believe in it to have the, as you say, cultural commitments? Or can we, is like just I'm genuinely asking because I don't
yeah,
really feel myself like in this kind of Neoplatonist meta position, I don't feel myself being drawn to any kind of um big rituals or big practices. Any ones that I do come from this kind of
yeah.
bloody Nietzschean sort of will to power, sort of just like I'm like
Mm,
there's no reason for it, there's no purpose to it, and yet I'm going to meditate and control my attention anyway. Screw
yeah,
it, just because I want to. And so yeah, I'm like I think
yeah.
that's the question. That's my video from this week, like was just that the question that we have to answer this
Yeah. Well,
century.
I think Plato, I mean, I think he really got very far and made a lot of predictions, but it was, I mean, because I consider myself a Christian Neoplatonist. I think a lot of the rituals, the structure, the civilization, like that was all fulfilled by Christianity. Like that wasn't Platonism didn't ever really build that stuff, and it became quite intellectual in a sense. But Plato predicted a lot of stuff. Like he predicted that we needed the most unjust thing to happen to the most just man as like a meter stick of being like, here's the worst possible thing that could happen to the best possible person. And that's the story of Christ. I mean, he's the opposite of Caesar, who was like the most powerful guy at the time, is like this guy. had the most horrendous death, tortured, killed at a very young age. And he was, a really good dude. Like he wasn't, everybody thought, like everybody that met him was like, whoa, shit, this guy, even the people that were killing him were like, yeah, he's all right. Like, we probably shouldn't, shouldn't do this. And that story couched in, from Adam in the fall of mankind to this redemptive pattern of being that's presented in the New Testament, that's really dealing with the suffering and pain of life through, picking up your cross, and then how that then gets translated through Peter and Paul into an organization and a church and rituals. Like, because the thing about Mass, like, that's an attempt to take the incarnation of Christ, decompose it into a pattern of behavior that we can participate in, where you eat of his flesh. Like, that's what a commitment of being like, okay, I'm gonna take on the burden of this guy's death and try and live it out. And so that's what that technology is for. Like, that's what we've tried to do. And we've thrown away all that technology. And I don't think we can just make up new ones. Like, the advantage of the Christian religion is that it, I mean, that's when time starts. Like, that's when we measure, you know what I mean? We're not going to make a new calendar and a new, start counting from now or something. And so I think in some sense we have to grapple with that tradition. It's being rebuilt, I think, and reforged, and stuff's going to die and stuff's going to be reborn. But I don't think there's another game really for the West at the
Okay.
moment.
So one is I've gone to church for the last 5 months and I've enjoyed that. Or I've used I still feel like I'm cheating though because it feels like doing research or it feels like doing like field
Yeah, well, I haven't,
um
so you know what I mean. You're doing better than me. I still have been trying to motivate myself to go to mass, but I haven't done it yet. I still
no,
have to get
I'm
baptized. So, but
it's
yeah,
it's just like it feels like research where I'm just kind of like, okay, how did everyone
mm,
organize? What are the psychotechnologies on like a felt sense? I really do try and go for this
yes,
kind of
yeah,
bottom up sort of approach.
really
Um,
interesting.
and for me, then the thing that's kind of allowed me, or the thing that I think of that like if the mass is not serving me and I've no interest in doing any sort of research at the moment, I do think of like the vertical beam of the crucifix as the chronological time, your past, present, future, and how you have to like
Mhm.
organize yourself and you have to schedule yourself and you have to fit yourself. You have to look into your past, integrate it, plan for your future, not be anxious. And then you also
Mhm.
have the horizontal, which is the eternal now, which is just to enjoy the moment as it is. And that's a forever and always crucifix. So that
Mm.
that one, no matter where I am, I have found that good. Now I have found other ways of interpreting like the yin yang symbol and different
Yeah,
symbols to be really beneficial. But I would just
yeah.
opt for that one, seeing as we're on about Christianity. And my second question is, I'm going to return to the fact of can we believe in something that wasn't historical and wasn't physical? It's like, okay, Jesus Christ, if that's going to be, if we're going to add
Mm.
the Christ there, are we going to say that the miracles happened? Are we going to say, like, I think we could probably say that he was a real person without too many
Yeah, I
people having
need
an
to.
issue?
I really want to. We
Damn
should do
it.
another talk on this.
See,
Like,
I knew this was
this
going
is
to
a good
happen.
place to start.
Uh,
Because it's a really good question, and I think it depends on what you mean by physical or by real. So, like,
um,
nominalism says that only physical things are real, but in
yeah.
Platonism, I mean, it's a multi-level ontology.
Okay,
So,
but
like,
there
the
you go.
forms
That's
are actually
the
realer than the reality, like in the cave. So we'd have to talk about all that. But I think
yeah.
let's do that. Let's do it again. I'm sorry I
No
got to
worries at
run,
all.
but this was
No, no,
sick.
I knew it was coming, so that's no problem at all. Just meta modern spirituality is something that I'm trying to like. Is that a Silk Road we could
Yeah.
actually sit on? I don't know. I've no
I don't know,
idea.
man. I think it's just
Um,
pre-Christian. It's just
oh
like the
yeah, well they did call
slowly.
John the fucking gateway drug, didn't they? So,
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just one step from postmodernism back towards, but
who knows?
can
But
discuss,
man,
you
thank you so
know.
much. That was an absolute
Thank you,
joy. Just
Nathan.
fucking brilliant. So I will chat to you. Have a good one, man.
Yeah, let's arrange soon. Next few weeks, we have
Definitely.
another chat.